The sun rose like a punishment over the Blackstone Valley, bleeding copper light across a landscape that had forgotten mercy. Clay Rourke stood on the ridge above his ranch headquarters, watching the morning burn away the last traces of night. Below him, the Double R spread out like a kingdom carved from stone and stubbornness. 50,000 acres of drought-hardened grassland, box canyons, and creek beds that hadn't seen water in 3 years. He was 42 years old, built like the cottonwood trees that somehow survived along the dry riverbeds, tall, weathered, and deeply rooted. His face carried the map of every hard season he'd endured, lines carved deep around eyes that had witnessed too much death and too little rain. The wind moved through the valley, carrying dust devils that danced like ghosts between the scattered cattle. Behind him, his horse stamped impatiently. Clay didn't move. He was thinking about water, about winter feed, about the 100 decisions that separated survival from collapse. The valley had always been harsh, but the last 3 years had tested everything he believed about the land and his place on it. "Boss?" The voice belonged to Miguel Santos, his foreman for 15 years. The older man rode up the ridge, his weathered face unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Miguel had been with Clay since the beginning, had helped him build the Double R from nothing into something that mattered. "Morning, Miguel." "Got word from town." Miguel pulled his horse alongside Clay's. "She's back." Clay felt something cold settle in his chest. He didn't need to ask who. There was only one she that would make Miguel ride out here at dawn with that careful tone in his voice. "When?" "Stage came in yesterday evening. She's staying at the Lockwood Hotel. Brought the girl with her." Sophie, his daughter, 12 years old now, nearly 13. He hadn't seen her in 8 months. "She send word?" "Not yet. But the whole town knows. You know how it is." Clay knew exactly how it was. In a frontier town like Salvation, news traveled faster than wildfire. By now, every rancher, merchant, and saloon regular would be discussing Eliza Rourke's return, speculating about what it meant, placing bets on whether Clay would back down or dig in. "Thank you, Miguel." Clay turned his horse toward the trail back down. "Let's get to work." They rode in silence through the early morning, dropping down from the ridge into the valley where the ranch buildings clustered like a small settlement. The main house stood at the center, a 2-story structure of timber and stone that Clay had built with his own hands 12 years ago, back when he still believed in permanence. Surrounding it were the bunkhouses, barns, corrals, and work sheds that made up the operational heart of the Double R. Men were already moving through the morning routine. Clay could see the cook smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, hear the sound of horses being readied in the corrals. The Double R employed 32 men year-round: cowboys, horsebreakers, blacksmiths, carpenters. Most of them had nowhere else to go, which made them loyal in a way money never could. As Clay and Miguel reached the main corral, a commotion erupted near the barn. Shouting voices, the sound of something heavy hitting wood. Clay saw a cluster of men forming a circle, that particular energy that meant a fight was brewing. "Jesus Christo," Miguel muttered. "Not again." They rode closer. At the center of the circle stood 2 men facing off. Clay recognized them both immediately. One was Jack Brennan, a veteran cowboy who'd been with the ranch for 5 years, a solid worker but mean-spirited when he drank. The other was newer, a kid who'd shown up 2 months ago looking for work. Rowan Hale. Maybe 19, 20 years old, lean and wiry, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes that burned with something Clay recognized as dangerous, that particular mix of pride and hunger that made young men either remarkable or dead. "I said move your gear." Brennan's voice carried across the yard. "That bunk's mine." "You said the far bunk was yours." Rowan stood his ground, shoulders squared. "I'm in the near one. There's a difference." "Don't mouth off to me, boy." Brennan stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. He was bigger than Rowan by 40 pounds, older by a decade. "I've been riding for this outfit while you were still sucking at your mama's teat." The watching men laughed nervously. Clay saw Rowan's jaw tighten, saw his hands curl into fists. "That's enough." Clay's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The circle of men parted as he dismounted and walked through. "Brennan, back to work." "Boss, this kid—" "I said back to work." Clay's tone left no room for argument. "Now." Brennan glared at Rowan for another moment, then spat in the dust and stalked away. The circle of men dispersed quickly, returning to their tasks with the practiced efficiency of people who knew better than to linger around trouble. Only Rowan remained, standing in the dusty yard with his hands still clenched. Clay studied him for a moment. The kid had shown up on foot, carrying everything he owned in a canvas roll. He'd asked for work without begging, demonstrated skill with horses without bragging. Miguel had put him on probation, same as any new hand. "You good with a rope?" Clay asked. Rowan blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes, sir." "Prove it. We're moving cattle from the North Range today. If you can handle yourself, you stay. If you can't, you're done. Understood?" "Understood." Clay turned to find Miguel waiting by the horses. His foreman raised an eyebrow. "That kid's got a mouth on him." "He's got pride," Clay corrected. "Different thing. Let's see if he's got skill to back it up." They spent the morning moving cattle from the depleted North Range to the marginally better grass along what was left of Miller Creek. It was brutal work under a sun that climbed higher and hotter with each passing hour. The cattle were ornery from thirst and poor feed, the horses worn down from too many days of hard use. Clay watched Rowan work. The kid could ride, not just competently, but with that natural grace some men were born with. He handled a rope like he'd been doing it since childhood, cutting out cattle with precision and patience. More importantly, he didn't complain, didn't show off, just put his head down and did the work. By mid-afternoon, they had 500 head settled near the creek. Clay called a break, and the men gathered in the thin shade of the cottonwoods to eat hardtack and dried beef, passing canteens of lukewarm water. Clay found Rowan sitting apart from the others, his back against a tree trunk. The kid was breathing hard but steady, his shirt dark with sweat. "Where'd you learn to work cattle?" Clay asked. Rowan looked up, surprised again to be addressed directly. "My father ran a small outfit up in Montana. Started riding young. What brings you this far south?" Something flickered across Rowan's face, pain maybe, or an anger carefully controlled. "Father sold out 3 years back. Lost everything to drought and debt. He ate a bullet that winter. Mother followed him 6 months later. Different method, same result." Clay heard the brutal honesty in the words, the refusal to dress up tragedy in pretty language. "I'm sorry." "Don't need sorry." Rowan's voice hardened. "Need work. Need to prove I'm worth something." "You proved it today. Job's yours if you want it." For the first time, Clay saw something like relief cross the kid's face. "Thank you, sir. Call me Clay. And stay clear of Brennan. He's a good worker, but he's got a mean streak. Don't give him reason to come at you." "I can handle myself." "I'm sure you can, but I don't need blood spilled in my bunkhouse. Understood?" Rowan nodded slowly. "Understood." They rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. Clay felt the exhaustion settling into his bones, the particular weariness that came from fighting the land day after day with no guarantee of victory. As they approached the ranch headquarters, Clay saw a buggy parked in front of the main house. Black lacquered wood, brass fittings, pulled by a matched pair of bays. His stomach tightened. "I'll handle the horses," Miguel said quietly. "You go on." Clay dismounted and walked toward the house. The front door opened before he reached it, and Eliza stepped out onto the porch. 12 years of marriage, 2 years of separation, and she still took his breath away. She was 38 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that somehow made her more beautiful. Her dress was expensive, city-bought, the kind of thing that cost more than most of his men earned in a month. But it was her eyes that hit him hardest, green as creek water, filled with intelligence and an anger that had never quite faded. "Clay." Her voice was controlled, formal. "Eliza." He stopped at the base of the porch steps. "Didn't expect you." "Didn't give you warning. Thought that might be easier." "For who?" She smiled without warmth. "For both of us." Sophie appeared in the doorway behind her mother. Clay felt his heart crack open at the sight of his daughter. She'd grown so much, taller, leaner, with her mother's auburn hair and something of his own stubbornness in the set of her jaw. She wore a simple blue dress that was already dusty from travel. "Hi, Papa." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Hey, Sophie." Clay wanted to run up the steps, pull her into his arms, but something in Eliza's posture warned him to stay where he was. "You've grown." That's what happens in 8 months. Eliza's words had an edge. Children grow. Life moves forward. "Can we talk inside?" Clay gestured to the house. "We can talk right here. What I have to say won't take long." Clay felt the trap closing. "Sophie, why don't you go see the horses? I bet Miguel would love to show you the new colts." Sophie looked at her mother, who nodded permission. The girl disappeared quickly, leaving Clay and Eliza alone on the porch. "I'm moving to San Francisco," Eliza said without preamble. "I've taken a position with the Temperance Union. We're opening a new office, organizing campaigns. It's important work." "I'm sure it is. I'm taking Sophie with me." There it was. The real reason for the visit. Clay felt anger rise in his chest, hot and immediate. "Like hell you are." "I'm her mother, Clay. I have rights." "So do I. This is her home." "This?" Eliza gestured at the dusty yard, the harsh landscape. "This is a dying ranch in the middle of nowhere. There's no school here, no culture, no future. She deserves better." "She deserves her father." Then perhaps her father should have thought about that before choosing this place over his family. The old argument, worn smooth by repetition but still sharp enough to cut. Clay climbed the steps until he was level with Eliza, close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the barely controlled fury in her expression. "I never chose this place over you," he said quietly. "I chose to build something that would last. For us. For Sophie. You chose dust and cattle and stubborn pride." Eliza's voice rose. "You chose endless work and drought and watching everything slowly die. You think that's a legacy? You think that's something to be proud of?" "I think it's something to fight for." "Then fight alone. I'm done watching you slowly kill yourself for a dream that was never mine." Clay felt the words like a physical blow. "When do you leave?" "End of the month. I've already made arrangements. Sophie will attend the Brenner Academy, best girls' school west of Chicago. She'll have opportunities, education, a real life." "You mean your life, not hers." "Yours." Eliza stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare make this about me. I'm doing what's best for our daughter. You're taking her away from her home to prove a point. I'm taking her away from this." She swept her arm across the valley, encompassing everything. "This dying dream that you won't let go of." They stood facing each other, years of unspoken resentment crackling in the air between them. Clay wanted to rage, to demand, to forbid her from leaving. But he'd learned long ago that you couldn't hold on to someone who'd already let go. "I won't make this easy," he said finally. "I never thought you would. We'll settle this properly, with lawyers if necessary. Then we'll settle it with lawyers." Eliza gathered her skirts. "I'm staying in town for the week. You can see Sophie whenever you like. After that—" She paused, and for just a moment Clay saw something like regret in her eyes. "After that, we'll see." She descended the steps and climbed into the buggy without another word. Clay watched her drive away, the matched bays kicking up dust as they headed back toward town. When the buggy was just a dark shape in the distance, he turned and saw Miguel standing by the corral, Sophie beside him. His daughter's face was carefully neutral, but her eyes were red. She'd heard everything. Clay walked toward them slowly, feeling every one of his 42 years. When he reached Sophie, he knelt down so they were eye level. "Hey, sweetheart, are you and Mama going to fight?" Her voice trembled. "We're going to talk. That's different." "It sounds the same." Clay pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body shake with suppressed tears. "I know this is hard, but no matter what happens, I'm your father. That doesn't change. Ever. You understand?" Sophie nodded against his shoulder. "Can I stay here tonight? Just tonight?" Clay looked at Miguel, who nodded. "Of course you can. This is your home." They walked to the house together, father and daughter, crossing the dusty yard as the sun set behind the western ridge. Clay felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. How did you fight for what mattered without destroying it in the process? How did you hold on to family when the land itself demanded everything you had to give? He didn't have answers. He only had tonight, this moment, his daughter's hand in his. He would make that enough. The next morning brought news that drove all thoughts of personal trouble from Clay's mind. He was in the barn helping the blacksmith shoe a fractious gelding when Pete Rawlings, one of his riders, came galloping in from the south range. "Boss, you need to see this." Clay handed the gelding's lead rope to the smith and walked out into the yard. Pete was still mounted, his horse lathered and blowing hard. What happened? "Settlers. Whole wagon train of them. Maybe 40 families. They've set up camp on the south range, right along Blackwater Creek." Clay felt his jaw tighten. "That's double our land." "They don't seem to care. Got their wagons circled, tents going up. They're digging in." Miguel appeared from the equipment shed. "How many men?" 60, 70 maybe. Women and children too. Looks like they mean to stay." Clay exchanged a look with Miguel. This was exactly what they'd feared. With the drought driving people west, desperate families were pushing into territory that couldn't support them, squatting on deeded land with the blessing of corrupt officials who cared more about settlement numbers than survival. "Saddle fresh horses," Clay ordered. "Miguel, you're with me. Pete, gather 6 more men, armed but not hostile. We're going to have a conversation." 20 minutes later, they rode south toward Blackwater Creek. Clay could see the dust from the settler camp long before they reached it, a brown smudge against the hard blue sky. As they drew closer, the camp resolved into detail. 40-some wagons arranged in a defensive circle, canvas tents sprouting between them like mushrooms. Livestock, mostly oxen and a few scraggly cows, grazing on grass that was already desperately thin. Children running between the wagons while women worked over cook fires. Men standing guard with rifles. Clay raised his hand, signaling his riders to slow. They approached at a walk, giving the settlers time to see they weren't charging in with violence. A group of men stepped forward from the camp. Clay counted 8 of them, all armed, all looking worn down by long travel and hard choices. The man in front was tall and gaunt, maybe 50 years old, with a beard gone gray and eyes that had seen too many miles. "That's far enough," the man called out. Clay reined in his horse 30 yards from the wagons. "My name's Clay Rourke. I own this land. You're trespassing." "Your name's on a piece of paper somewhere," the man replied. "Our claims from the Federal Land Office says we got rights to settle here." "You got a claim on Blackwater Creek?" Clay kept his voice level. "Who sold it to you?" "Territorial agent named Deschamps. Paid him $40 a family for deeds and water rights." Clay felt a cold fury settle in his gut. Emile Deschamps. The territorial land agent was notorious for selling claims on land he didn't own, pocketing the money while desperate settlers took all the risk. "Deschamps doesn't own this land," Clay said carefully. "I do. Have for 12 years. Got the deed registered in the territorial capital. You've been swindled." The settlers murmured among themselves. The gaunt man's expression hardened. "We got papers." "Worthless papers. That man took your money and sold you land that wasn't his to sell." "Then we'll take it up with the law." But the man's voice wavered. He knew, Clay thought. Deep down, he already knew he'd been cheated. "There's no law out here that'll help you," Clay said, gentler now. "You want to file a claim? You'll have to ride 3 days to the territorial capital, pay for lawyers, and wait months for a hearing. By that time, this creek will be bone dry, and your families will be starving." A woman pushed forward from the wagons. She was younger than the gaunt man, maybe 30, with a hard-bitten face and fierce eyes. "So what are you telling us? Pack up and leave? We got nowhere else to go. We sold everything we had to get here." Clay looked at her, at all of them, exhausted, desperate, clinging to false hope because it was all they had left. He'd seen this before. The frontier chewed up people like this, good people who just wanted land and a future, and spat out their bones. "I'm telling you the truth," he said. "This land can't support you. There's been no rain in 3 years. That creek you're camped on, it'll be dry by August. The grass you see is all that's left. Your livestock will starve, then you will." "We'll manage," the woman said stubbornly. "We've managed this far." "You've managed nothing." Miguel spoke for the first time, his accented voice carrying across the space between them. "You've been lucky. Luck runs out." "We're not leaving," the gaunt man said. "We paid for this land. We're staying." Clay felt the situation slipping away from reason towards something darker. He could see it in the settlers' faces, that desperate determination that made people do stupid, dangerous things. Behind him, his own men were tense, hands near their weapons. I don't want trouble, Clay said, but I won't have squatters on my land. You've got 3 days to pack up and move on. After that, he let the implication hang in the air. After that what? The woman's voice rose. You'll drive us off? Shoot us? We got women and children here. You gonna murder families? I'm gonna defend what's mine. So are we. They stared at each other across the dusty ground, two groups of people with incompatible needs and no good options. Clay felt the weight of command pressing down on him. He didn't want to hurt these people, but he couldn't let them stay. The Double R was barely holding on as it was. More mouths to feed, more cattle competing for grass. It would push everything over the edge. 3 days, he repeated. Then he turned his horse and rode away, his men following. They rode in silence until the settler camp was out of sight. Finally, Miguel spoke. They won't leave. I know. So what do we do? Clay didn't answer. He didn't have an answer, just more impossible choices. 1. When they returned to the ranch, Clay found another problem waiting. A cavalry detachment was camped in his yard. 20 soldiers in dusty blue uniforms, horses tied to the corral fence. A lieutenant stood on the porch of the main house, talking to Sophie. Clay dismounted quickly and walked toward them. Lieutenant, something I can help you with? The officer turned. He was young, maybe 25, with a soft face that suggested he hadn't been west very long. Mr. Rourke. Lieutenant David Mercer, 3rd Cavalry. I'm looking for information. About what? About a band of Shoshone that's been camping in the hills north of your range. You seen them? Clay felt Sophie's eyes on him. I've seen them. Small group, maybe 30 people. They've been there for weeks, hunting, gathering, not causing trouble. They're causing trouble for the territorial government. Mercer's voice took on an official tone. They've been ordered to relocate to the Wind River Reservation. They've refused. My orders are to bring them in. Those orders come from Deschamps? From the territorial governor through Agent Deschamps. Yes. Of course. Clay felt pieces clicking into place. Deschamps wanted the land clear for his fake settlers, wanted the tribe moved so he could sell more worthless claims. And the army was his enforcement arm. Those people aren't hurting anyone, Clay said carefully. They're just trying to survive, same as everyone else. They're violating federal relocation orders. Mercer's expression hardened. I have my orders, Mr. Rourke. Now, do you know where they're camped? Clay thought about lying, but the lieutenant's tone suggested he already knew the answer. North Range up in the pine breaks above Stone Creek. But Lieutenant, thank you for your cooperation. Mercer descended the steps. We'll handle it from here. Clay watched the cavalry detachment ride north, dust trailing behind them. Sophie came to stand beside him, her small hand slipping into his. Papa, what's going to happen to those people? I don't know, sweetheart. Will the soldiers hurt them? Clay wanted to lie, to reassure her, but she'd already learned too much about broken promises. I hope not, but sometimes people with power do things that aren't right. Then why don't you stop them? Because I'm just one man with one ranch. I can't fight the government. Sophie looked up at him with those green eyes she'd inherited from her mother, eyes that saw too much, understood too much. Mama says you're the strongest man she knows. She says you never back down from anything. Your mama says a lot of things, but it's true, isn't it? Clay knelt beside his daughter. Strength isn't just about fighting, Sophie. Sometimes it's about knowing when you can't win, about protecting what's most important. What's most important? You, he said simply. Always you. She hugged him fiercely. Clay held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the fragile weight of her in his arms. How did you explain to a child that the world was complicated, that good people sometimes had to stand aside and let bad things happen because the alternative was worse? He couldn't. He could only hold her and hope that someday she'd understand. That evening, Clay rode into town. He needed to talk to Eliza, needed to figure out some kind of arrangement that wouldn't tear Sophie apart. The ride gave him time to think about everything that was happening, the settlers, the army, the tribe facing relocation. It all felt connected somehow, like threads in a tangled web. Salvation wasn't much of a town, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few side streets that petered out into prairie. The Lockwood Hotel stood at the far end, 3 stories of whitewashed wood that tried and failed to look sophisticated. Clay found Eliza in the hotel dining room, eating alone at a corner table. She looked up as he approached, her expression guarded. "Clay, I wasn't expecting you. Can we talk?" She gestured to the empty chair across from her. Clay sat, suddenly aware of how dusty and trail-worn he must look compared to her crisp traveling dress. "Sophie's fine," he said. "At the ranch. Miguel's wife is looking after her." "I know. I trust her with you." Eliza set down her fork. "That's never been the issue." "Then what is the issue? Really?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You want the truth?" "I'm tired, Clay. Tired of waiting for rain that never comes. Tired of watching you pour everything into land that's killing you. Tired of being alone in a marriage where I always come second." "You never came second." "Didn't I?" Her voice was soft but cutting. "How many dinners did you miss because of fence lines? How many nights did you sleep in the bunkhouse because of calving season? How many times did I try to talk to you about leaving, about finding somewhere better, and you just shut down?" Clay wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because she wasn't wrong. The ranch had demanded everything from him, and he'd given it willingly. Maybe too willingly. "I was building something," he said finally. "For us." "You were building something for yourself. Your dream, Clay. Not mine. I tried to share it, tried to make it work. But I can't anymore. And I won't let Sophie grow up the way I did, watching her father slowly disappear into work and worry." "So you'll take her away, let her grow up without her father at all?" "I'll let her grow up with opportunities, education, a future that isn't tied to whether it rains." Clay felt the argument slipping away from him again. "There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it." Eliza picked up her fork, then set it down again without eating. "I didn't want this, Clay. I wanted us to work. But wanting isn't enough." "What is enough?" "I don't know. Maybe nothing is. Maybe we were doomed from the start. A city girl and a rancher trying to make a life in a place that doesn't forgive mistakes." Clay stood. "I'm not giving up on this. On us." "I already have." Eliza's voice was quiet, final. "I gave up 2 years ago, when I finally accepted that you love this land more than you'll ever love me." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" She looked up at him, and he saw tears in her eyes for the first time. "Then prove it. Walk away from the ranch. Come to San Francisco with us. Start over." The words hung in the air between them. Clay opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because they both knew he couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. The double R was more than land and cattle. It was every choice he'd made, every sacrifice endured, every piece of himself he'd poured into creating something that mattered. "I can't," he said finally. "I know." Eliza wiped her eyes carefully. "That's why I'm leaving." Clay walked out of the hotel into the darkening street. The sun had set, painting the western sky in shades of purple and gold. He stood on the boardwalk, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. His marriage ending, his daughter being taken away, drought strangling the land, settlers and soldiers and tribes all heading toward collision. He was one man in the middle of forces he couldn't control, trying to hold on to something that might already be lost. The smart thing would be to let go, to walk away, to choose what was easy over what was right. But Clay Rourke had never been smart that way. He'd spent his whole life choosing the hard path, the fight worth fighting, the stand worth making. He wasn't about to stop now. He untied his horse and rode back toward the ranch. Above him, stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, cold, distant, indifferent to the struggles of the people below. The frontier didn't care about fairness or justice or love. It only cared about strength. Clay would be strong. He had to be. Because everyone depending on him, Sophie, his men, even Eliza in her own way, needed him to be the man they believed he was. The man who never backed down, never gave up, never stopped fighting for what mattered, even if that fight destroyed him in the end. He rode through the night, heading home, while behind him the town lights faded, and ahead the dark bulk of the valley waited like a challenge he'd never quite overcome. The cavalry returned 3 days later, trailing dust and the stink of smoke. Clay was in the north pasture checking water levels when he saw them coming down from the pine breaks. Even from a distance, he could tell something had gone wrong. The horses moved too slow. The riders slumped in their saddles with the defeated posture of men who'd done something they wished they could forget. He rode to meet them. Lieutenant Mercer looked like he'd aged a decade in 72 hours. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with soot, and something darker that might have been blood. "Lieutenant," Clay reined in his horse. "What happened?" Mercer didn't meet his eyes. "Orders were carried out, the tribe's being relocated to the Wind River Reservation." "How many did you lose?" Now Mercer looked up, confusion crossing his face. "Lose? We didn't lose any men." "I meant the tribe." The lieutenant's expression shuddered. "That's not your concern, Mr. Rourke." "The hell it isn't. They were camped on my land. I knew those people." "Then you knew they were breaking federal law." Mercer's voice turned hard, defensive. "We gave them every opportunity to surrender peacefully. They chose resistance." Clay felt ice settle in his gut. "How many?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss military operations." "How many, Lieutenant?" Mercer stared at him for a long moment, and something like shame flickered across his young face. 7 dead, 19 wounded. The rest are being escorted to the reservation under guard. 7 dead. Clay thought about the small band he'd seen hunting in the hills, remembered an old man who'd traded him 3 deerskins for salt and coffee, a young woman with a baby strapped to her back. People just trying to survive in a world that wanted them erased. "You could have let them go," Clay said quietly. "Just look the other way." "I have my orders." "Orders aren't the same as what's right." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I don't expect you to understand, but I don't need your judgment either. I did my duty." "Then you'll have to live with it." The lieutenant spurred his horse forward, leading his detachment south toward town. Clay watched them go, feeling a familiar anger building in his chest. This was how it always worked on the frontier. Power crushed the powerless, authority justified cruelty, and good men looked away because fighting back seemed impossible. He turned his horse toward the pine breaks, toward where the tribe had been camped. He needed to see it for himself, needed to understand what had happened in those hills while he'd been worrying about settlers and divorce papers and whether the cattle would survive another month. The camp was a graveyard of scattered possessions and burned shelters. Cooking pots lay overturned in the dirt. A child's doll made of woven grass lay trampled near what had been a fire circle. The ground was torn up from horses and struggle, dark stains marking places where blood had soaked into the dry earth. Clay dismounted and walked through the ruins. A raven called from a dead pine, harsh and mocking. The wind moved through the scattered debris, making a sound like whispered prayers or accusations. He found a blanket with intricate beadwork, half burned but still beautiful. Found a man's hunting knife broken in 2. Found evidence of lives interrupted, dignity destroyed, people who'd asked only to be left alone meeting violence instead. He stood in the center of the destroyed camp and felt something shift inside him. All his life he'd played by the rules, worked within the system, tried to build and preserve rather than fight and destroy. He'd told himself that was strength, that endurance meant something. But standing here among the ashes, he wondered if he'd just been a coward, if his careful neutrality had made him complicit in every injustice he'd witnessed and done nothing to stop. Movement at the edge of the camp made him turn sharply. A figure emerged from the tree line, an old man, bent and limping, face lined with grief and pain. Clay recognized him as the elder who'd traded him the deerskins. The old man's shirt was dark with blood from a wound in his shoulder. "You shouldn't be here," Clay said. "The soldiers, gone." The old man's voice was rough, speaking English with careful precision. "They took my people, left me because they thought I was dead." Clay moved toward him. "Let me see that wound." The old man waved him off. "I will die soon. The bleeding won't stop. But before I die, I want to tell you something." "Save your strength." "For what?" "My family is in chains. My grandson died in my arms. My granddaughter—" His voice broke. "I have nothing left to save strength for." Clay stood silent, letting the old man speak. "We were not making war," the elder continued. "We were living as we always lived, hunting, gathering plants, praying to the sky. We harmed no one. But the agent, the one they called Deschamps, he wanted our land for his settlers. So he told the soldiers we were dangerous, told them we were planning attacks. All lies." "I know." Do you? Do you truly know? The old man's eyes burned with fever and fury. Or do you tell yourself you know while you do nothing? While you stand aside and let evil men destroy the innocent? The words hit Clay like physical blows. I couldn't stop them. I'm just one man? The elder laughed bitterly. There is no such thing as just one man. Every man who does nothing makes the evil possible. You saw us. You knew we were peaceful. You could have warned us, hidden us, stood with us. Instead, you told the soldiers where to find us. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You chose safety. You chose to preserve what is yours while others lost everything. Do not pretend that is strength. That is fear wearing strength's face. Clay felt the accusation settle into his bones because it was true. He'd known what was coming and done nothing. He'd prioritized his ranch, his problems, his careful balance over the lives of people who had no voice, no power, no defense. What can I do now? He asked quietly. The old man swayed, his strength failing. My people go to the reservation, but they will not stay long. The condition's there. No food, no medicine, only more death. If they try to leave, soldiers will hunt them. If they stay, they will die slowly. Either way, we are erased. Where are they taking them? Fort Prescott first, then Wind River. The elder's legs gave out. Clay caught him, lowered him gently to the ground. My grandson's wife, she has a son, 2 years old. His name is Running Wolf. If you have any honor, any courage, find a way to help them. Do not let my family's line end in that prison. I will. Clay didn't know how he'd keep that promise, but he made it anyway. I swear it. The old man's eyes closed. His breathing became shallow, ragged. Clay stayed with him, holding the old hand in his, until the breathing stopped and the elder's spirit fled to whatever place awaited beyond the burned camp and the broken world. Clay buried him there, using his hands and a flat rock to dig a shallow grave among the pines. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was what he could offer. As he worked, the sun climbed higher, beating down on the destroyed camp. The raven called again, and this time Clay heard it differently. Not mockery, but witness. Someone had to bear witness to what happened here. Someone had to remember. When the grave was covered and marked with stones, Clay rode back toward the ranch. His hands were raw and bleeding, his shirt soaked with sweat, but his mind was clear for the first time in days. The old man had been right. There was no neutral ground, no safe middle path. You either stood for something or you enabled everything you claimed to oppose. He was done standing aside. Miguel was waiting at the ranch when Clay returned, his face troubled. We got problems, Jefe. The settlers on Blackwater Creek, they're not moving. They've dug irrigation ditches, started planting crops. They mean to stay. I know. The men are getting restless. They want to know what we're doing about it. Clay dismounted, wincing as his raw hands gripped the saddle horn. Call a meeting, all hands. Tonight after supper. I need to talk to everyone. What are you planning? The right thing. For once. Miguel studied him carefully. You sure about that? The right thing gets people killed out here. Then maybe it's time some things were worth dying for. That evening, 32 ranch hands gathered in the barn. They sat on hay bales and feed sacks, faces lit by lantern light, expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Clay stood before them, feeling the weight of their attention. These were his men, his responsibility. Whatever he asked of them, some would die. The question was whether he could live with that cost. Most of you know about the settlers on Blackwater Creek, he began. They're squatting on Double R land, sold worthless claims by a corrupt land agent named Deschamps. They're desperate, they're stubborn, and they're not leaving. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered men. Jack Brennan spoke up from the back. So when do we ride down there and clear them out? Should have done it days ago. We're not clearing them out. Silence fell. The men stared at Clay like he'd lost his mind. Boss, they're on our land, someone said. We got rights. They've got nowhere else to go, Clay replied. They sold everything they had for those fake claims. If we drive them off, they'll starve. That's not our problem, Brennan insisted. We got our own troubles. Can't feed the whole frontier. You're right. We can't. Clay looked around the circle of faces. But we can choose whether to be part of the problem or part of the solution. Deschamps is selling worthless land to desperate people, lining his pockets while they die. The The government is forcing peaceful tribes off their land to make room for more fake claims. It's all connected: corruption, greed, and good people getting crushed in the middle. So what are you saying? Miguel asked quietly. I'm saying we take a stand. We stop looking the other way while powerful men destroy the innocent. We start fighting back. But fighting who? Rowan Hale spoke for the first time, his young face intense in the lamplight. The government? The army? We're ranch hands, not revolutionaries. Sometimes there's no difference. Clay felt the words forming, knew he was crossing a line, but unable to stop. 3 days ago, the cavalry massacred a peaceful tribe camped in our hills. 7 dead, 19 wounded. The survivors are being marched to a reservation where they'll die slowly instead of quickly. And we did nothing. What could we do? Someone asked. We can't fight the army. We can do what's right instead of what's safe. Clay's voice rose. I'm riding to Fort Prescott tomorrow. I'm going to find a way to help those people. Anyone who wants to come with me is welcome. Anyone who doesn't, I understand. But I'm done standing aside. Silence stretched. Then Miguel stood. I'm with you, Jefe. Rowan stood next. Me too. One by one, more men rose. Not all of them. Brennan and a half-dozen others stayed seated, clearly thinking Clay had lost his mind. But 23 men stood, and that was enough. What about the ranch? Brennan challenged. You gonna just abandon it? Let everything we've worked for fall apart? The ranch doesn't matter if we've got no honor left, Clay said. If we're just another group of men taking what we can and ignoring everything else, then we're no different from Deschamps, no better than the people destroying this land. Pretty speech, Brennan sneered. Doesn't change reality. You can't save everyone, boss. Try it, and you'll lose everything. Maybe, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. The meeting broke up in uneasy tension. Those who'd committed to riding with Clay began preparing for departure. Those who hadn't drifted away, talking among themselves in low, worried voices. Clay knew he'd divided his crew, maybe permanently. But the old elder's words kept echoing in his mind. Everyone has a choice. He'd made his. Later that night, Clay found Sophie sitting on the porch of the main house, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. She looked up as he approached, her face serious beyond her years. You're leaving tomorrow. Just for a few days. Miguel will look after you. Mama says you're being foolish, that you're going to get yourself killed for people who don't matter. Clay sat beside her on the porch steps. Your mama said that. I heard her talking to Mrs. Brennan in town. She said you always had more pride than sense. She's probably right about that. Clay put his arm around his daughter. But sometimes pride is all a person has. Sometimes you have to stand up even when it's stupid. The soldiers killed those people in the hills, didn't they? The ones who were hunting. Clay hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Were they bad people? No, sweetheart. They were just people trying to survive, like everyone else. Then why did the soldiers hurt them? How did you explain injustice to a child? How did you make sense of a world where power mattered more than right? Because sometimes people with authority do terrible things, and sometimes good people stand aside and let it happen because fighting seems too hard or too dangerous. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You're not standing aside anymore. No, I'm not. Is that why Mama's mad at you? Because you always fight? Your Mama's not mad exactly. She's tired. Tired of worrying, tired of struggling, tired of a husband who can't let things go. Clay pulled her closer. She's not wrong to be tired. This life is hard, harder than it should be. Do you wish you'd done things differently? Clay thought about that carefully. Sometimes, but if I had, I wouldn't have you. So, no, not really. Sophie hugged him fiercely. I don't want you to go tomorrow. I know, but I have to. Promise you'll come back. I promise. It was a promise he had no business making, given what he was planning. But Sophie needed to hear it, and he needed to believe it. Sometimes hope was built on nothing but stubborn refusal to accept the alternative. The next morning, Clay and 23 riders left the ranch at dawn. They rode hard, pushing the horses, making good time across the dry valleys and sage flats. Fort Prescott was 2 days' ride east, a military outpost on the edge of the territory. By the time they made camp the first night, both men and horses were exhausted. Clay sat by the fire, drinking coffee and watching his men settle in for the night. Miguel came to sit beside him. "You thought about what we're actually going to do when we get there?" the foreman asked. "Not really. That's what I figured." Miguel poured himself coffee. "We can't just ride in and demand they release prisoners. We got no authority, no legal standing. They'll arrest us for interfering with military operations." "I know. So what's the plan?" Clay stared into the fire. "I'm going to talk to whoever's in charge, appeal to their decency, ask them to show mercy. And if they don't have decency, then we'll figure something else out." Miguel shook his head. "You're planning to improvise this? Jefe, that's not a plan. That's suicide." "You got a better idea?" "Yeah, turn around, go home. Protect what we have instead of chasing martyrdom." Clay looked at his old friend. "If I do that, I become exactly what that old man accused me of being, a coward hiding behind excuses. Better a live coward than a dead hero." "Not always." Clay set down his cup. "I spent 12 years building the Double R, poured everything into it, time, money, my marriage. You know what I realized standing in that burned camp? None of it matters if I'm just another man taking what's mine and ignoring everything else. The ranch doesn't make me good. It's just property. What matters is what I do with the power I have. And you're choosing to risk it all for people you barely know. I'm choosing to be someone my daughter can respect. Someone I can respect." Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "Liza's going to take Sophie away." "Probably. And the ranch might fail. Probably that too. So you're gambling everything on a gesture that might not even work." "Yeah." Clay smiled without humor. "Like I said, more pride than sense." Miguel laughed despite himself. "All right, Jefe. But when this goes bad, and it will go bad, don't say I didn't warn you." They reached Fort Prescott the next afternoon. The outpost sat in a dusty valley, a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a palisade wall. The American flag hung limp in the still air. Clay could see soldiers moving between the buildings, prisoners in a holding pen near the barracks. He rode to the main gate with Miguel and Rowan, leaving the rest of his men a mile back. A sergeant stopped them at the entrance. "State your business." "I need to speak with your commanding officer," Clay said. "It's about the Shoshone prisoners brought in 3 days ago." The sergeant's expression hardened. "Colonel Whitmore doesn't meet with civilians about military matters. Tell him Clay Rourke wants 5 minutes of his time. I own the land where those people were arrested. I have information relevant to their case." The sergeant looked skeptical, but sent a runner. 20 minutes later, they were escorted into the colonel's office. Whitmore was a career soldier, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and the kind of rigid posture that came from decades of military discipline. He didn't invite them to sit. "Mr. Rourke, you have 5 minutes." Clay stood at attention, recognizing the power dynamics. "Colonel, the Shoshone band your men brought in, they weren't hostile. They were peaceful hunters who'd been living on my land for weeks without causing any trouble. Then they should have complied with relocation orders. They were starving, sir. The reservation you're sending them to has no food, no medical care. You're condemning them to death." "I'm following federal policy." Whitmore's voice was flat, bureaucratic. "The Shoshone are being relocated to designated territory. How they fare there is not my concern. With respect, sir, it should be." "Are you questioning my orders, Mr. Rourke?" Clay felt the trap closing. "I'm questioning the morality of those orders, yes." Whitmore's expression turned to ice. "Then you can take that up with the territorial governor. My job is to enforce the law, not debate its merits. Now, if that's all, it's not." Clay forced himself to stay calm. "I want permission to provide supplies to the prisoners, food, medicine, blankets, at my own expense." "Denied. The prisoners are under military custody. Civilians are not permitted contact." "They're people, Colonel, human beings. Some of them are wounded. They need care. They need to accept their situation and comply with relocation. The sooner they understand that, the easier it will be for everyone." Whitmore moved toward the door, signaling the meeting was over. "Your 5 minutes are up, Mr. Rourke. My men will escort you out." Clay didn't move. "I'm not leaving until you show some basic humanity." Soldiers appeared in the doorway, hands on their weapons. Whitmore's face flushed with anger. "You're on military property, disrupting operations. I could have you arrested." "Then arrest me. But you'll have to explain to your superiors why you're jailing a local rancher for asking you to feed starving prisoners." For a moment, the tension crackled. Then Whitmore stepped close to Clay, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You self-righteous son of a bitch. You think I enjoy this? You think I like watching those people suffer? I have my orders. I have a career, a pension, a duty. I can't just ignore all that because it makes you feel morally superior. Then don't ignore it. Bend it. Find a loophole. Show compassion within the system. There is no compassion in the system. That's what you frontier idealists never understand. The system exists to enforce order, not to care. If I start making exceptions, the whole thing falls apart. Maybe it should fall apart. Whitmore stepped back, his expression a mixture of fury and something that might have been respect. Get out, now, before I do something we'll both regret. Clay walked out of the office, Miguel and Rowan flanking him. They rode out of the fort in tense silence. Only when they were clear of the walls did Rowan speak. That went well? About as expected, Clay replied. So what now? Miguel asked. Clay looked back at the fort, at the holding pens visible through the gates. He thought about running Wolf, the 2-year-old grandson the old elder had asked him to protect. Thought about 19 wounded people receiving no medical care. Thought about the choice between law and justice, order and humanity. Now we break them out, he said quietly. Miguel stared at him. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? Jefe, that's insane. That's treason. They'll hunt us down and hang us. Probably. Clay turned his horse toward where their men waited. But I made a promise to a dying man, and I'm done letting powerful people destroy the innocent while I stand aside and call it prudence. Rowan's face split into a fierce grin. Now we're talking. When do we do it? Tonight, under cover of darkness. Clay looked at both men. But I'm not ordering anyone to come. This is beyond ranch business, beyond anything I have a right to ask. Anyone who rides with me tonight is choosing to become an outlaw. There's no going back from that. I'm in, Rowan said immediately. Miguel swore in Spanish, long and creatively. Then he sighed. 15 years I've worked for you, Jefe. 15 years watching you make stubborn, dangerous decisions. I should have learned by now. He met Clay's eyes. I'm in too, but when they hang us, I'm going to be very angry with you. Clay felt something loosen in his chest. He wasn't alone in this madness. That didn't make it smart, but it made it possible. They rode back to camp and gathered the men. Clay laid out his plan, such as it was. Half of them would create a distraction on the south side of the fort, while the rest went over the north wall, freed the prisoners, and got them to horses waiting in the hills. It was simple, desperate, and likely to get them all killed. When he finished explaining, Clay looked around the circle of faces. I need you to understand what this means. If we do this, we're criminals. The army will hunt us. The government will brand us traitors. Anyone caught will face execution. So I'm asking you one last time, are you sure? Every man nodded. Even the ones who looked terrified nodded. Clay felt pride swell in his chest. These were good men, brave men, choosing to risk everything for people they'd never met because it was right. Then let's get ready, he said. We ride at midnight. The hours before midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clay's men checked weapons, tightened saddle cinches, spoke in low voices about what was coming. Some wrote letters they hoped would reach family if things went wrong. Others sat in silence, faces reflecting the firelight and their own private fears. Clay moved among them, offering quiet words of encouragement while his own gut churned with doubt. Rowan approached him as the moon rose, a thin crescent offering barely enough light to see by. The young man's face was set with determination, but his hands trembled slightly as he checked his rifle. You ever done anything like this before? Rowan asked. No? That's what I figured. Rowan managed a tight smile. We're all going to die, aren't we? Maybe. Probably. Clay met his eyes. You can still back out. No one would think less of you. I would. Rowan looked toward the distant fort, barely visible as a darker shadow against the night sky. My father spent his whole life playing it safe. Did everything by the rules. Still lost everything. At least this way, if I die, it'll be for something that matters. Clay understood that reasoning better than he cared to admit. Stay close to Miguel tonight. He's been in tight spots before. He'll keep you alive if anyone can. What about you? I'll be wherever the worst of it is. That's where I need to be. Miguel materialized out of the darkness, his face grim. "It's time, Jefe." Clay gathered the men in a tight circle. 23 faces looked back at him, some young, some old, all frightened and determined in equal measure. He felt the weight of their trust like a physical thing, heavy and precious and terrifying. "You all know the plan," he said quietly. "Team 1 creates the distraction at the south wall. Fires, noise, make them think we're trying to break through there. Team 2 goes over the north wall, finds the holding pens, gets the prisoners out and to the horses. We meet at the canyon rendezvous point. If you get separated, head west into the Badlands and lay low." "What about after?" someone asked. "Where do we go? We can't come back to the ranch." Clay had been avoiding that question. "Anyone who wants can head for Mexico. I'll provide enough money to get you started somewhere new. Anyone who wants to stay and face the consequences. That's your choice. But the ranch is finished either way. After tonight, the government will seize the double R. Everything we built is gone." The men absorbed this in heavy silence. They'd known it intellectually, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real. Some looked angry, others resigned. A few seemed almost relieved, as if the decision had freed them from something. "Any other questions?" Clay asked. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. They'd made their choices. Now came the hard part of living with them. They rode toward Fort Prescott in two groups, splitting a mile from the walls. Clay led Team 2, the group that would actually free the prisoners. Miguel commanded Team 1, the distraction force. As they parted, the old foreman gripped Clay's arm. "If this goes sideways, Jefe, don't try to be a hero. Get those people out and run. Don't look back." "Same to you, amigo." "I'm too old and mean to die." "You, on the other hand," Miguel shook his head, "just try not to get shot in the first 5 minutes." They separated into the darkness. Clay's group circled north, moving slowly to avoid making noise. The fort loomed ahead, its wooden walls stark against the star-filled sky. Clay could see sentries on the walls, their silhouettes backlit by torches. He counted 4 guards visible from this angle, probably more on the other sides. They dismounted a quarter-mile out and moved forward on foot, leading the horses. The ground was rocky, treacherous in the poor light. Clay felt his heart hammering, his mouth dry. This was the point of no return. Once Miguel's team started their distraction, everything would happen fast and violent. They reached the base of the north wall and crouched in the shadows. Clay checked his pocket watch, 10 minutes until midnight. 10 minutes until everything changed. Rowan shifted beside him, his breathing quick and shallow. "What if the prisoners can't travel? Some of them are wounded. Then we carry them. And if the soldiers start shooting, we shoot back." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Clay looked along the wall, finding the darkest section between 2 torch positions. That would be their entry point. The wall was 12 feet high, rough timber that should provide decent hand and footholds. Getting up wouldn't be the problem. Getting down the other side with prisoners in tow, that would be where it got complicated. A church bell in the fort rang midnight. The sound carried across the valley, clear and resonant. Clay tensed, waiting. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the night exploded. The south wall lit up with fire and gunshots. Clay heard men shouting, horses screaming, the deep boom of something heavy, maybe dynamite, shaking the ground. Miguel's team was making enough noise for an army, exactly as planned. "Now!" Clay hissed. They rushed the north wall. Clay reached it first, finding handholds in the rough timber and pulling himself up. The wood was old, splintered, but solid enough. He climbed fast, hearing his men scrambling up behind him. At the top, he paused, looking down into the fort. The interior was chaos. Soldiers ran toward the south wall where flames now licked at the timber. Officers shouted contradictory orders. In the confusion, no one was looking north. The holding pens were exactly where Clay had remembered. Low wooden structures near the barracks, maybe 40 yards from the wall. He dropped down inside, landing hard and rolling. Pain shot through his ankle, but he ignored it, coming up with his rifle ready. The others followed. Rowan, then 4 more men. They moved quickly toward the pens, staying low, using buildings for cover. The prisoners saw them coming. Clay heard voices rise in alarm, then recognition. A woman pressed against the bars of the nearest pen, her face a mask of hope and fear. "We're getting you out," Clay said. "Stay quiet." The locks on the pens were simple but solid. Clay used his rifle butt to smash the first one, the sound lost in the greater noise from the south wall. The door swung open. Prisoners began filing out, men, women, children. Some limped from wounds, others were carried by companions. Clay counted 19 souls, just as the lieutenant had said. "Can you ride?" he asked the woman who'd first seen them. "Some of us. Others need help." "We have horses waiting. Move fast and stay together." More locks shattered, more prisoners freed. They gathered in a tight group, looking to Clay for direction. He saw their faces in the firelight from the south wall, exhausted, hurt, desperately hoping this wasn't some cruel trick. Then a shout rang out from near the barracks. A soldier had spotted them. The man raised his rifle. Rowan shot first. The soldier went down, and suddenly the night was full of gunfire. Clay heard bullets whining past, thudding into wood. His men returned fire, providing cover as the prisoners ran for the north wall. "Get them up and over," Clay shouted. "Go! Go! Go!" His men formed a human ladder at the wall, boosting prisoners up and over. It was painfully slow. Clay fired at muzzle flashes, saw soldiers advancing across the compound. More shouts, more gunfire. The distraction at the south wall was collapsing as troops realized the real threat was inside the fort. A bullet caught one of Clay's men in the shoulder, spinning him around. Another man grabbed him, kept him moving. The prisoners were going over the wall now, dropping down the other side. Clay heard horses whinnying as his remaining crew brought the mounts forward. "Rowan, get them on horses!" Clay fired twice more, dropped to reload. "Don't wait for us." "I'm not leaving you. That's an order." Clay saw soldiers massing for a rush. "Get those people out of here." Rowan hesitated, then scrambled up the wall. Clay and 3 remaining men laid down covering fire, making the soldiers take cover. It bought precious seconds. Clay heard hoofbeats from the other side of the wall, the prisoners riding away into darkness. "Time to go!" one of his men yelled. They ran for the wall. Clay went up last, providing cover. Bullets splintered wood around him. He felt one tug at his sleeve, another burn across his ribs. Then he was over, dropping down onto the outside where 2 horses waited. He mounted and spurred hard. Behind him, the fort erupted with activity. Soldiers poured through the gates, torches bobbing like angry fireflies. But they were on foot, and Clay's group had a head start. They rode hard through the darkness, following the sound of the main group ahead. Clay's ribs burned where the bullet had grazed him. His ankle throbbed from the landing, but adrenaline kept him moving. They had to reach the canyon rendezvous before the soldiers organized a proper pursuit. The moon was setting when they finally caught up with the main group. Rowan had them organized, prisoners doubled up on horses, the slowest riders in the middle, scouts ranging ahead and behind. Miguel's distraction team had rejoined them, looking singed and wild-eyed, but mostly intact. "Casualties?" Clay asked as he rode up beside Miguel. "2 wounded, none dead. You?" "Same. The prisoners?" "All accounted for. Some in bad shape, but alive." Miguel's face was grim. "We actually pulled it off, Jefe. We actually did it." Clay allowed himself a moment of relief. Then reality set in. "They'll be coming, full cavalry, properly equipped. We need to reach the Badlands before dawn." They pushed on through the night, the horses lathering and blowing. The wounded moaned with each jarring step. Children whimpered in their mothers' arms. But they kept moving because stopping meant capture and capture meant death. The Badlands began as a series of eroded hills, then deepened into a maze of canyons and dry washes. Clay knew this country from years of chasing stray cattle. The army didn't. If they could get deep enough into the maze before sunrise, they might actually escape. Dawn found them 10 miles into the Badlands, the horses stumbling with exhaustion. Clay called a halt in a box canyon with a spring, one of the few water sources in this desolate country. The prisoners collapsed, too tired even to celebrate their freedom. Clay's men unsaddled horses with mechanical efficiency, posting guards at the canyon entrance. Clay found the woman who'd spoken to him at the fort. She was tending to a wounded man, using cloth torn from her dress as bandages. "What's your name?" Clay asked. "Morning Star." Her English was precise, learned from missionaries, probably. "This is my husband, Swift Elk. He was shot during the arrest. The wound is infected." Clay could see that even without medical training. The man's shoulder was swollen, angry red streaks radiating from a poorly healed bullet hole. We have some medicine, not much, but it might help. You risked everything to free us. Morningstar's eyes met his. Why? Because it was right. Many things are right. Few men risk death for them. Clay thought of the old elder, of his granddaughter, and Running Wolf. I made a promise to one of your people. He asked me to help protect his family. Is there a boy here named Running Wolf, about 2 years old? Morningstar's expression tightened with grief. He died 2 days ago, fever. We had no medicine, no clean water. The soldiers wouldn't even let us bury him properly. The news hit Clay like a physical blow. He'd been too late. All of this, the raid, the risk, becoming an outlaw, and he'd still failed to keep his promise. I'm sorry. You tried. That matters more than you know. Morningstar returned to tending her husband. The old one who spoke to you, that was Swift Elk's grandfather. He would be pleased you honored your word, even if the outcome was beyond your control. Clay wanted to argue that trying wasn't enough, that results mattered more than intentions. But looking at the exhausted, wounded people filling the canyon, people who were alive and free instead of dying slowly in a prison, he realized maybe Morningstar was right. You couldn't control everything. You could only do what was right and hope it made a difference. He found Miguel checking on the horses. How long before they find us? Depends on how good their tracker is. If they're smart, they'll send riders to cut off the western passes, try to box us in. If they're stupid, they'll follow our trail straight into the maze and get lost. Miguel looked up from examining a horse's hoof. Question is, what do we do with 19 freed prisoners? We can't take them to the ranch. I know a place. Old line shack up in the Copper Hills, near the northern boundary. It's rough, but there's water and some shelter. They can hide there while we figure out next steps. Next steps being what exactly? We're outlaws now, Jefe. Every lawman and soldier in the territory will be hunting us. Clay had been thinking about that during the long night ride. We need to expose Deschamps, show people what he's been doing, selling fake land claims, forcing tribes off their territory for profit. If we can turn public opinion, maybe the governor will back down. That's a big maybe. It's all we've got. They rested in the canyon until midday, giving the horses time to recover and the wounded time to receive what basic care they could provide. Then they moved again, working deeper into the Badlands. Clay sent scouts ranging ahead, watching for any sign of pursuit. It was Rowan who spotted them, a cavalry patrol, maybe 20 men, working their way up a parallel canyon. He came galloping back to the main group, his horse foam-flecked. "Soldiers, half a mile south, moving fast!" Clay made a quick decision. Split up. Miguel, take the prisoners north to the line shack. I'll take 6 men and draw the cavalry east, make them think we're running for the territorial line. That's suicide, Miguel protested. It's the only way to keep them safe. Clay gestured at the prisoners. They can't outrun cavalry, not in their condition. We can. And when the soldiers catch you. They won't. Miguel swore in Spanish again, but knew better than to argue further. 6 men isn't enough. Take 10. 6. I need you to have enough guns to protect the prisoners if another patrol finds them. They split quickly. Clay took Rowan and 5 others, turning east while Miguel led the larger group north. Clay set a brutal pace, making sure they left obvious tracks. Within an hour, he heard the cavalry behind them, hoofbeats echoing off canyon walls, officers shouting orders. They rode for 3 hours, leading the soldiers deeper into the maze. Clay knew every turn, every dead end, every hidden passage. He used that knowledge ruthlessly, staying just ahead of capture, wearing down the cavalry horses while preserving his own. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Clay led his group into a narrow slot canyon. They dismounted and climbed on foot, leading the horses up a steep trail that emerged on a mesa top. Behind them, the cavalry reached the slot canyon and stopped, unable to follow mounted. Clay looked down at the frustrated officers below. Lieutenant Mercer was among them, his young face twisted with rage. "Rourke, you're finished. There's nowhere left to run." "I'm not running, Lieutenant," Clay called back. "I'm leading. There's a difference. You freed federal prisoners, attacked a military installation. You'll hang for this." "Maybe, but those people are free, and everyone's going to know why I did it. They'll know about Deschamps, about the corruption, about soldiers murdering peaceful families. No one will care. You're a criminal now. Nothing you say matters." Clay felt the truth of those words. The lieutenant was probably right. History was written by the powerful, and Clay Rourke was just one rancher who'd thrown away everything on a grand gesture. But he'd still made that gesture. He'd still chosen right over safe. That had to count for something. "Tell Colonel Whitmore I'm sorry," Clay shouted. "Sorry he's too much of a coward to stand up for what's decent. Sorry he values his pension over human lives." He turned away from the canyon edge, mounted his horse, and rode across the mesa. Behind him, the cavalry scrambled to find another route up. But by then, Clay's group was gone, vanished into the vast emptiness of the Badlands. They reached the line shack 2 days later, exhausted and hungry. The structure was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a good spring nearby and enough shelter for the prisoners. Miguel had gotten everyone there safely, posted guards, and even organized hunting parties to bring in game. Morning Star met Clay as he dismounted. "Your friend Miguel says you led the soldiers away. You saved us again. Just bought us time." Clay looked around at the freed prisoners, seeing them beginning to recover some strength, some hope. "But we can't stay here forever. The army will keep searching." "We know. We're discussing options." Morning Star gestured to where several tribal leaders sat in council. "Some want to go north, try to reach Canada. Others want to risk the journey to Wind River, find families there and help organize resistance." "What do you want?" "I want my husband to heal. I want to live without fear. I want justice for my people." Her expression hardened. "But I'll settle for survival." That night, Clay gathered his men around a small fire. They looked like outlaws now, bearded, dirty, eyes hard with the knowledge of what they'd done and what it meant. Jack Brennan was gone, had taken his loyalists and presumably headed back to the ranch. That left 13 men who'd chosen to see this through. "We need to decide what comes next," Clay said. "The prisoners are safe for now, but we're all wanted men. Anyone who wants to take money and head for Mexico, I'll give you what I can spare. No hard feelings." No one moved to leave. Finally, Rowan spoke. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going back to Salvation, going to make Deschamps answer for what he's done." "How? The man's got government protection." "Not if I can prove he's been stealing from settlers. Not if I can show he's been collaborating with the army to clear land illegally." But Clay had been working this through during the long ride. Every claim he sold, every bribe he took, it's all documented somewhere. We find those records, we destroy them. "And then what?" another man asked. "You think exposing one corrupt agent changes anything? The system that empowered him is still there." "Maybe, but it's a start." Clay met each man's eyes. "I'm done standing aside. Done letting powerful men crush the innocent. If all I can do is take down one corrupt agent, that's more than I've done my whole life." Miguel leaned forward. "You're talking about breaking into Deschamps' office, stealing government documents. That's not just outlawry, that's treason. We crossed that line when we freed those prisoners. There's levels of treason, Jefe. This is a whole new level." "I know. That's why I'm not asking any of you to come. This is my fight now." Silence fell. Then Rowan stood. "I'm with you." One by one, the others rose. Not out of blind loyalty, Clay thought, but out of shared conviction. They'd all chosen this path. They'd all decided some things mattered more than safety. "Then we ride tomorrow," Clay said. 6 of us go to Salvation. The rest stay here, protect the prisoners. If we're not back in 3 days..." He paused, then finished quietly. "If we're not back in 3 days, assume we're dead and get these people to safety however you can." The next morning, Clay rode out with 5 men, Miguel, Rowan, and 3 others. They left the Badlands behind, heading west toward Salvation. The town was 4 days away if they pushed hard. 4 days to plan, to prepare, to accept that they were probably riding toward their deaths. But as the sun rose behind them, painting the eastern sky in shades of copper and gold, Clay felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not the endless grind of survival, not the careful preservation of what he'd built, but real purpose. The kind that made life worth living, even if it cost you everything. He thought about Sophie, about Eliza, about the ranch he'd sacrificed for this moment. He hoped his daughter would understand someday. Hoped she'd grow up knowing her father had chosen principle over profit, courage over comfort. That had to be worth something. Even if it ended at the gallows, it had to be worth something. They rode through this day and into the evening, pushing toward salvation and whatever waited there. Behind them, the Badlands gradually gave way to rolling grassland. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, lay a reckoning. They reached salvation on the fourth day, riding in under cover of darkness. The town slept, windows dark except for the saloons where lamplight spilled onto the dusty street. Clay led his men to the livery stable at the edge of town, where old Tom Hendricks kept horses and asked no questions for the right price. Tom emerged from his shack, lantern in hand, squinting at the riders. Recognition crossed his weathered face, followed quickly by alarm. "Clay Rourke. Heard you were dead. Or wanted. Maybe both." "Both sounds about right." Clay dismounted, his body aching from days in the saddle. "Need a place to keep these horses quiet. And our presence even quieter." Tom studied the group, dusty, armed, dangerous-looking men who'd clearly been living rough. "There's a reward posted, $500 for information leading to your capture." "I'll give you 1,000 to forget you saw us." The old man's eyes widened. Then he spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Make it 1,200 and you got a deal. Times are hard." 1,200 it is. Clay counted out gold coins from his dwindling reserves. "We need supplies too. Food, ammunition, information. What's happening in town?" Tom pocketed the coins. "All hell's broken loose, that's what. The territorial governor's here personally, along with a federal marshal. They're hunting you like you killed the president. Got soldiers searching every ranch within 50 miles. Deschamps is crowing about how he'll see you hang." "Deschamps is here?" "At the Grand Hotel, holding court like he's royalty. Got reporters come all the way from Denver to cover the story. He's spinning it like you're some kind of savage, leading raids on peaceful settlements." Tom paused. "Though between you and me, most folks aren't buying it. Too many people got swindled by his land deals. They're asking questions." Clay felt a spark of hope. "What kind of questions?" "Like, how come the government's so eager to protect an agent who's been selling worthless claims? Like why peaceful tribes needed to be massacred to make room for settlers who can't survive anyway. The newspapers are starting to pick it apart." Tom gestured toward the stable. "Get your horses inside. I'll bring food and news." They led the horses into the stable's dim interior, unsaddling quietly. Miguel found a corner where they could spread bedrolls, out of sight from the street. Rowan posted himself near the door, rifle ready, young eyes scanning for trouble. "If reporters are here, that changes things," Miguel said quietly. "Gives us leverage. Or gets us killed faster," one of the other men muttered. "Newspapers love a public hanging." Clay was thinking hard. Deschamps would have his records somewhere close, either at his office or his hotel room. The office would be more secure but also more official, making theft harder to explain away. The hotel room was personal space, harder to defend legally, but also harder to access without being seen. Tom returned with bread, cold beef, and coffee. As they ate, he provided more information. "The governor's scheduled a public address tomorrow noon in the town square. Going to declare martial law, expand the search. He's bringing in more troops." "How many soldiers in town right now?" Clay asked. 20, maybe 30. Most are out searching, but the marshal's got deputies and Deschamps has hired guns. Maybe 40 armed men total who'd shoot you on sight. The odds were absurd. 6 men against 40 in a town where everyone knew their faces. But Clay had committed to this course. Backing down now meant everything. The raid, the sacrifice, the risks had been for nothing. "I need to get into Deschamps' office," he said. "Tonight, before security tightens further. Tom, where does he keep his records?" "Second floor of the territorial building, end of the hall. Big office, fancy furniture. He's got a safe there, brought it special from back east. Keeps all his important papers locked up tight." "Can you open a safe?" Miguel asked Clay. "No, but I bet I know someone who can." Clay turned to one of his men, a slight fellow named Danny Watts, who'd been a locksmith before drifting west. "Danny?" Danny grinned nervously. "I can try, but safes aren't like door locks. Could take hours. And if it's a good one, I might not crack it at all. We'll make time." Clay looked at each man. "Miguel, you and 2 others create a distraction on the far side of town. Nothing violent, just noise, confusion, draw attention. Rowan, Danny, you're with me. We go in through the back, crack the safe, get the records, and get out before anyone knows we were there." "And if we get caught?" Rowan asked. "We don't." It wasn't much of a contingency plan, but it was all Clay had. They rested until midnight, then moved out into the sleeping town. The streets were empty except for a lone deputy making rounds. They watched him pass, then split into two groups. Miguel headed east with his men, while Clay, Rowan, and Danny circled behind the territorial building. It was a two-story brick structure that tried to project authority through classical columns and a grandiose entrance. The back, however, was plain service doors and coal chutes. Clay tested a window on the ground floor, locked. The next one, too. The third shifted under pressure, old wood warped by weather. He worked it carefully, feeling the catch give. The window slid open with a whisper of sound. They climbed through into a storage room filled with filing cabinets and boxes. The air smelled of dust and old paper. Clay led them to the stairs, each step creaking despite their care. At the second-floor landing, they paused, listening. Silence. The building was empty, as Tom had promised. Clay moved down the hallway, counting doors. Deschamps' office was at the end, marked with an ornate nameplate. The door was locked, but Danny had it open in under a minute. Inside, the office spoke of a man who valued appearance over substance. Expensive furniture, imported wallpaper, a crystal chandelier that must have cost a fortune to transport. And against the far wall, a massive iron safe with gilt decorations. Danny knelt before it, producing tools from his coat. "This is a Herring Hall Marvin, top of the line. Could take me hours." "You've got 30 minutes. Clay moved to the window, watching the street below. After that, Miguel's distraction will end and deputies will return to normal patrols. Danny went to work, his ear pressed to the safe's door, fingers delicate on the dial. Rowan searched the desk, finding letters, ledgers, documents. Clay helped, looking for anything that might expose Deschamps' corruption. They found plenty. Letters arranging kickbacks from settlers, correspondence with army officers coordinating tribal removals, ledgers showing land sold multiple times to different buyers. It was all there, a complete record of systematic fraud and abuse of power. "Got enough to hang him 10 times over," Rowan whispered, shuffling papers. "If we can get this to the newspapers—" "I'm in." Danny's voice was tight with satisfaction. The safe door swung open, or swung. Inside were more documents, deeds, contracts, and something Clay hadn't expected, a leather journal filled with handwritten notes. He flipped through it quickly, his anger building with each page. Deschamps had documented everything, apparently believing he was untouchable. Plans to expand land sales into territory still occupied by tribes. Agreements with the governor to overlook irregularities. Even notes about bribing judges and legislators. "This is it," Clay said. "This is everything we need." A shout from the street made them freeze. Clay looked out the window and saw deputies running toward the east side of town. Miguel's distraction had begun, but now they had to get out before the confusion drew attention to the territorial building. They stuffed papers into sacks, took the journal, locked the safe back up. Danny relocked the office door behind them. They moved quickly down the stairs, back through the storage room, out the window they'd entered. They were halfway across the alley when lamplight bloomed in a second-floor window of the building next door. A woman's voice called out, sharp with alarm. "Thieves! Someone's breaking into the territorial building!" Clay cursed. They ran for the street, keeping to shadows. Behind them, the woman kept shouting. Doors opened, voices rose. Someone rang a bell. They reached the livery stable just as soldiers began pouring into the street. Tom met them at the door, his face pale. "What did you do?" "Got what we came for." Clay thrust the sacks at him. "Hide these. If anyone asks, you never saw us. They'll search everywhere. Then hide them well." Clay grabbed the old man's shoulder. "This is evidence that can bring down Deschamps. Keep it safe until we can get it to the newspapers." Tom took the sacks reluctantly. "Where are you going?" "To find the rest of my men and get out of this town." They mounted quickly and rode out the back, heading for the rendezvous point where Miguel was supposed to meet them. The town was fully awake now, soldiers running in all directions, officers shouting orders. Clay heard gunfire from the east side, Miguel's group making their escape. They rode hard through the darkness, navigating by starlight. A mile from town, 3 riders emerged from a wash. Miguel and his 2 men, all accounted for. "Everyone good?" Clay asked. "Close calls, but no hits." Miguel's grin was fierce. "Did you get what you needed?" "And then some." enough to destroy Deschamps and maybe take down the governor too. They rode until dawn, putting distance between themselves and salvation. When the sun rose, painting the prairie in gold and amber, they stopped to rest the horses and assess their situation. "What now?" Rowan asked. "We've got the evidence, but we're still wanted men. Can't exactly walk into a newspaper office." Clay had been thinking about that. "We need someone with credibility to deliver it, someone the newspapers will listen to." "Like who?" An idea formed, audacious and desperate. "Like my wife." Miguel stared at him. "Eliza. Jefe, she wants to take your daughter and leave. She thinks you're reckless and destructive. She also hates corruption and injustice. She's been fighting for causes her whole life: temperance, women's rights, social reform. If I can convince her this matters, she'll help. And if you can't, then we find another way." But Clay knew there was no other way. Eliza was the only person he knew with connections to legitimate reform movements and newspapers. She was also the only person who might believe him over the government's version of events. They rested for 2 hours, then rode toward the Lockwood Hotel. Clay went alone, leaving his men hidden outside town. Walking into Salvation in daylight was suicide, but he had no choice. The evidence was useless without someone to deliver it to the public. He entered through the hotel's back entrance, avoiding the main lobby. A maid saw him and gasped, but he pressed money into her hand and she pointed him to Eliza's room. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Clay climbed the back stairs, every nerve screaming danger. He could hear voices from the lobby, soldiers, deputies, people discussing the manhunt. His hand rested on his pistol as he reached the 3rd floor. He knocked on Eliza's door. Silence. Then footsteps and Sophie's voice. "Who is it?" "It's Papa, sweetheart. Is your mama there?" The door flew open. Sophie threw herself into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, everyone says you're a criminal. They say terrible things." "I know, baby, I know." Clay held her tight, then gently pushed her back inside the room. Eliza stood by the window, her face a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been relief. "Clay, what are you doing here? They're searching the whole territory for you." "I need your help." Eliza laughed harshly. "My help? You attack a military fort, free federal prisoners, and now you want my help? Have you lost your mind?" "Probably." Clay closed the door behind him. "But I need you to listen, please." Sophie clung to his hand, looking between her parents with frightened eyes. Eliza's expression remained hard, but she gestured for him to continue. Clay laid it out quickly. Deschamps' corruption, the fraudulent land sales, the manufactured crisis with the tribe to clear land for more fake claims. He explained about the documents, the evidence that could expose the whole system. "I've got proof," he finished. "Letters, ledgers, a journal with everything documented. But I can't go public with it. I'm a wanted criminal. No one will listen to me." "So you want me to do it?" "You have connections. The Temperance Union, reform newspapers, political contacts. If you present the evidence, people will believe you." Eliza walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "Do you understand what you're asking? If I do this, I become part of your crusade. My reputation, my job, my future, all of it compromised by association with an outlaw." "I know. And if the evidence isn't as damning as you think, if Deschamps has legal protection, I could be arrested for possessing stolen government documents. The evidence is solid, but yes, there's risk." Eliza turned to face him, her green eyes blazing. "Why should I believe you? You've been lying to yourself for years, Clay. Lying about the ranch, about the drought, about what you were building out there. Why should I trust your judgment now?" The words stung because they were partly true, but Clay met her gaze steadily. "Because for once, I'm not fighting for myself. I'm not trying to prove something, or build something, or hold on to something. I'm fighting for people who have no voice. And whether you believe in me or not, you believe in that." Silence stretched between them. Sophie squeezed Clay's hand, looking up at her mother with pleading eyes. "Mama, please." Eliza's expression softened slightly. "What exactly is in these documents?" Clay told her everything: the bribes, the fake claims, the coordination with army officers to remove tribes for profit. As he spoke, he saw Eliza's anger shift from him to the system he was describing. This was the kind of injustice she'd spent her life fighting. This was the corruption she'd railed against in countless speeches and letters. "Where are the documents now?" she asked. "Hidden in town, safe until I can arrange delivery." Eliza paced the room, thinking hard. Finally, she said, "There's a reporter here from the Denver Tribune. Came to cover the manhunt, but he's got a reputation for investigative work. If the evidence is as good as you claim, he'll run with it. Can you get him to look at it?" "Maybe, but Clay—" She stopped pacing, faced him directly. "If I do this, if I help you, it doesn't fix us. It doesn't change what's happened between us. I know. I'm still taking Sophie to San Francisco. I'm still done with the ranch, with this life, with watching you destroy yourself for causes you can't win." Clay felt the words like a knife, but he nodded. "I understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm just asking you to do what's right." Eliza looked at him for a long moment, and Clay saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, fierce, principled, unwilling to compromise her values. "Get me the documents. I'll get them to the reporter. But after that, you need to disappear. Take your men and go. Because if you stay, they will kill you." "I can't leave until this is finished." "It will never be finished." Eliza's voice rose with frustration. "Don't you understand? Even if we expose Deschamps, even if we bring down the governor, the system remains. There will always be another corrupt agent, another fraudulent scheme, another injustice to fight. You can't win this war, Clay. The best you can do is survive it. Maybe survival isn't enough anymore. It has to be, for Sophie's sake, if not your own." Eliza glanced at their daughter, who watched with wide, fearful eyes. "She needs a father. A living father, not a martyr." Sophie pulled on Clay's hand. "Papa, please don't die. Please just come with us." Clay knelt down, cupping his daughter's face in his rough hands. "Sweetheart, I can't. Not yet. But I promise you, when this is over, I'll find you. Wherever you are, I'll find you." "You promise?" "I promise." It was another promise he had no business making, but looking into Sophie's eyes, he couldn't offer anything less. She hugged him fiercely, and Clay held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. When she finally released him, Eliza spoke quietly. "The reporter's name is James Caldwell. He's staying in this hotel, room 215. I'll arrange a meeting for tonight. Bring the documents to the back entrance at midnight." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This could still blow up in all our faces." Eliza's expression hardened again. "And Clay? After you deliver those documents, you need to go. Far away. Change your name. Start over. Because whether this works or not, you're a dead man if you stay in this territory." Clay nodded, though he had no intention of running. He kissed Sophie's forehead, met Eliza's eyes one last time, then slipped out of the room and down the back stairs. Getting out of the hotel was easier than getting in. The soldiers were focused on the perimeter, watching for armed gangs, not one man moving quietly through service corridors. Clay reached the street and melted into the early morning crowd. He retrieved the documents from Tom at the livery stable, paying the old man another $100 for his trouble. Then he returned to where his men waited outside town. Miguel looked up as Clay approached. "Well?" "She's going to help. We meet a reporter at midnight." "And after that?" "After that, we wait to see if the truth matters more than power." They spent the day hidden in a box canyon 5 miles from town, watching the road for patrols. Clay used the time to read through Deschamps' journal more carefully, his disgust growing with each page. The man had documented years of systematic theft, corruption, and abuse. He'd treated it all as a game, tallying his profits like a businessman tracking inventory. As the sun set, Clay gathered his men. "Tonight we deliver the evidence. After that, things could go several ways. Best case, the newspapers run with it and public pressure forces the government to act. Worst case, they suppress the story and come after us harder." "What's the middle case?" Rowan asked. "The story runs, but we still hang. Truth comes out, but we don't live to see it matter." The men absorbed this soberly. They'd all known the risks, but having them stated so baldly made it real. "Anyone who wants to leave now, I'll give you money and my blessing," Clay said. "You've done more than anyone had a right to ask. You've earned your freedom." No one moved. These weren't men who ran. They'd cast their lot with this fight and would see it through. At 11:30, Clay rode back into Salvation alone, carrying the satchel of documents. The town was quieter now, most people in bed, though soldiers still patrolled. He approached the Lockwood Hotel from behind, dismounting in the alley. Eliza waited at the back entrance with a man Clay didn't recognize. He was maybe 40, lean and intense, with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes that took in everything. "Mr. Rourke," the man said. "James Caldwell, Denver Tribune. Your wife tells me you have evidence of government corruption." "More than evidence, proof." Clay handed over the satchel. "Everything you need to expose a systematic fraud involving the Territorial Land Office, the Governor's Office, and Army Command." Caldwell opened the satchel, began flipping through documents. His expression shifted from skepticism to shock to barely contained excitement. "These are authentic?" "Stolen directly from Agent Deschamps' safe. His own records, his own handwriting." "If this is real," Caldwell looked up, eyes blazing. "This is the biggest corruption scandal in territorial history. Senators will fall. The governor could face federal charges. Then publish it. Get it out before they can suppress it." "They'll try to discredit you," Caldwell warned. "Paint you as a criminal trying to justify his crimes." "I know. Publish anyway." Caldwell studied Clay for a long moment. "Why are you doing this? You could have taken this evidence and used it to bargain for immunity. Instead, you're handing it to me with no strings attached. Because it's not about me anymore. It's about stopping men like Deschamps from crushing people who can't fight back." Clay glanced at Eliza, saw something that might have been respect in her expression. "Publish the truth. That's all I'm asking." "I will. But Mr. Rourke," Caldwell closed the satchel carefully, "you need to understand something. Even if this brings down Deschamps, even if it exposes the whole corrupt system, it won't change what you are. You freed federal prisoners. You attacked a military fort. The law doesn't forgive that, no matter how righteous your cause." "I know." "Then you're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Eliza said softly. Caldwell nodded to them both and disappeared into the hotel, clutching the satchel like it was made of gold. Clay stood alone with Eliza in the alley, years of marriage and separation heavy between them. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Wait to see if the truth makes a difference, then probably die." "Don't be dramatic. It doesn't suit you." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic." Clay looked at her in the lamplight, memorizing her face. "Thank you. For this. For everything. I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was right." "I know. That's what I always loved about you. Your integrity." Eliza's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "If you loved it so much, why didn't you fight harder to keep me?" "Because I didn't know how to be both the man you needed and the man I thought I had to be." Clay felt his own throat tighten. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For choosing the ranch over us. For not listening when you tried to tell me we were drowning. For being too stubborn to admit I was wrong. Clay, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I finally understand. You deserved better than what I gave you. Sophie deserves better. I hope you find it in San Francisco." Eliza stepped closer, and for a moment Clay thought she might embrace him. Instead, she pressed something into his hand, a photograph of Sophie, taken a few months ago. "So you remember what you're fighting for," she said quietly, "and maybe what you should try to stay alive for." Then she turned and walked back into the hotel, leaving Clay alone in the alley with his daughter's face smiling up at him from the photograph. He tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket, mounted his horse, and rode back to where his men waited. The die was cast. The evidence was out. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see if the truth could actually triumph over power, or if they'd all just condemned themselves for nothing. The Denver Tribune hit the streets 2 days later with a headline that set the territory ablaze. "Systematic fraud exposed. Territorial Agent Deschamps orchestrated years of corruption. Army complicity alleged." Clay read the article in a copy Tom had smuggled out to their camp, his hands trembling as he absorbed Caldwell's meticulous reporting. Every detail was there: the fake land claims, the bribes, the coordination with military officers to clear native land for fraudulent sales. Deschamps' own journal entries were quoted extensively, his words condemning him more effectively than any accusation could. "They published everything," Miguel said, reading over Clay's shoulder. Every document, every transaction. Jefe, this is bigger than we thought. Within hours, other newspapers picked up the story. The territorial capital erupted in scandal. Legislators demanded investigations. Federal officials scrambled to distance themselves from Deschamps. The governor issued a terse statement calling for a full inquiry, while privately, according to Tom's sources, he was burning correspondence and preparing to resign. But the immediate result wasn't celebration. It was fury. On the third day after publication, a cavalry company rode out from Fort Prescott with explicit orders: find Clay Rourke and his men, dead or alive. The preferential emphasis, according to deserters who later fled the army, was heavily on dead. Deschamps, cornered and desperate, had convinced his remaining allies that silencing the outlaws was the only way to contain the damage. Clay and his men were camped in the Badlands when scouts brought word of the approaching force. 50 soldiers, well-armed and angry, moving with the grim determination of men who'd been publicly humiliated and wanted blood. "We can't fight 50 soldiers," one of Clay's men said. "We barely survived 20. "We're not fighting them." Clay was already thinking through options, all of them bad. "We're going to lead them exactly where we want them." Miguel understood immediately. "The settlers on Blackwater Creek. You want to expose what's happening there. Those people are starving on land Deschamps sold them illegally. If we can get reporters there, get witnesses to see the reality, it stops being abstract corruption and becomes human suffering. That's what changes minds." "So we lead the cavalry straight to desperate settlers who might get caught in crossfire?" Rowan's voice was sharp with anger. "That's not protecting them. That's using them." "I'm giving them a voice." Clay's jaw set stubbornly. "Right now, they're invisible victims of a fraud that newspapers talk about in terms of money and land deals. If people see them, see the children starving, the sick going without medicine, the families who sold everything for worthless claims, it becomes real. And if the soldiers start shooting, then we make sure they're shooting at us, not the settlers." It was a thin plan built on hope and desperation, but it was all they had. Clay sent riders to the settler camp with a message. Journalists were coming, and with them a chance to tell their story. Be ready. Be visible. Don't be afraid to show the truth of what Deschamps' fraud had cost them. Then Clay and his remaining men positioned themselves between the advancing cavalry and Blackwater Creek, leaving obvious tracks that would draw the soldiers exactly where they wanted them. The cavalry arrived at noon on the fourth day, thunder of hooves announcing their approach. Clay watched from a ridge as they spread out in formation, professional, disciplined, deadly. Lieutenant Mercer led them, his young face hard with determination. Clay rode out alone to meet them, hands visible and empty. Mercer raised his hand, halting the company. They faced each other across 50 yards of dusty ground. "Mr. Rourke," Mercer called, "you're under arrest for assault on a federal installation, theft of government property, and aiding in the escape of federal prisoners." "I know what I'm charged with, Lieutenant. I'm here to negotiate terms." "There are no terms. Surrender yourself and your men immediately." "I'll surrender, but first, I need you to see something." Clay gestured toward Blackwater Creek, visible in the valley below. "Those settlers down there, they're the real victims of Deschamps' fraud, families who paid everything they had for land that can't support them. I want you to see what your orders have been protecting." Mercer's expression flickered with uncertainty. "My orders are to arrest you, not tour settler camps. Your orders come from men who've been lying to you. Come see the truth, then arrest me if you still think that's justice." For a long moment, Mercer didn't respond. Then he spurred his horse forward, signaling 5 men to accompany him. They rode together toward the settler camp, the rest of the cavalry following at a distance. As they approached, Clay saw that the settlers had understood his message. They'd gathered in the open, maybe 60 people looking gaunt and desperate. Children with distended bellies sat listlessly in the dust. Women held babies who cried with the thin, exhausted sound of starvation. Men stood with slumped shoulders, their eyes hollow with defeat. And standing among them were 3 men Clay recognized as journalists, Caldwell from the Tribune, and 2 others who'd come to cover the manhunt but were now witnessing something far more important. Mercer reined in his horse, staring at the scene. His face went pale as the reality hit him. These weren't abstract claims in a newspaper article. These were real people, dying slowly on land they'd been promised would sustain them. The gaunt man who'd confronted Clay weeks ago stepped forward. "Lieutenant, I'm Samuel Porter. My family paid Agent Deschamps $40 for deed to this land. We were told there was good water, fertile soil, government support for new settlers. We've been here 6 weeks. The creek's nearly dry. The soil won't grow anything. We have no food left. My youngest daughter died 3 days ago. She was 4 years old." Mercer dismounted slowly, walking among the settlers. Clay saw him taking it all in. The makeshift graves marked with crude crosses, the empty supply wagons, the cooking fires with nothing cooking over them. The journalist moved with him, taking notes, asking questions. A woman held up papers. The deed Deschamps had sold her family. "We paid for this. The government promised us this. Where's the government now?" Mercer had no answer. He stood in the center of the camp, surrounded by the human cost of corruption, and Clay saw something break in the young officer's face. The certainty, the rigid adherence to orders, it cracked under the weight of undeniable truth. "These people need help," Mercer said finally, his voice rough. "Medical care, food, transport out of here." "Yes, they do," Clay replied. "But that's not why you came, is it? You came to arrest the man who exposed what happened to them." Mercer turned to face him, and Clay saw a war raging behind the lieutenant's eyes. Duty versus conscience, orders versus morality. It was a battle Clay understood intimately. "I have my orders," Mercer said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You also have eyes. You can see what following those orders means, what it makes you complicit in." Before Mercer could respond, the sound of more horses approaching made everyone turn. A rider came hard from the direction of Salvation, his horse lathered and blowing. He reined up beside Mercer, nearly falling from the saddle in his haste. "Lieutenant, message from Fort Prescott." The soldier thrust a paper at Mercer. "Came by telegraph an hour ago." Mercer read quickly, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that might have been relief. When he looked up, his eyes found Clay. "Federal marshals arrested Deschamps this morning in the territorial capital. He's being transported to Denver to face charges. The governor has resigned. The War Department has ordered an immediate investigation into military conduct during tribal relocations." Mercer's voice strengthened as he continued reading. "All operations related to the Rourke manhunt are suspended pending review. Territorial judge has issued an order for—" He paused, reading more carefully. "For immediate provision of humanitarian aid to settlers affected by fraudulent land claims." A murmur ran through the assembled settlers. Caldwell was scribbling furiously in his notebook. Clay felt something unclench in his chest, though he knew this wasn't over. "What about my arrest?" he asked. Mercer folded the paper slowly. "The order suspends all operations. That includes your arrest, pending judicial review of the circumstances." He met Clay's eyes. "You're not free, Mr. Rourke, but you're not under immediate arrest either. The court will decide what happens next." "Fair enough." Mercer turned to his men. "Detail 10 soldiers to remain here and provide assistance. The rest of you return to the fort. I need to report this situation to Colonel Whitmore." He looked back at the settlers. "Help is coming. Real help, not promises. You have my word." The cavalry rode out, leaving a contingent behind to help the settlers. Clay watched them go, barely believing what had just happened. They'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but they'd won enough. The corruption was exposed, the perpetrators facing justice, and the victims finally receiving aid. Miguel appeared beside him, grinning broadly. "We did it, Jefe. We actually did it." "Not yet. There's still loose ends." The biggest loose end was sitting in the Lockwood Hotel, preparing to leave for San Francisco. Clay rode back to Salvation that evening, no longer hiding, no longer hunted. The town had transformed in the days since the scandal broke. People who'd avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully as he passed. Some even called out support. He found Eliza in her hotel room, packing the last of her belongings. Sophie sat on the bed, watching her mother with red-rimmed eyes. They both looked up as Clay entered. "I heard," Eliza said. "Deschamps arrested, governor resigned. Congratulations. You won your war." "I didn't win anything. The truth won. You made that possible." Eliza continued folding clothes, not meeting his eyes. "What happens now? With you, I mean. Are you still facing charges?" "Probably. The court will decide. But the manhunt's over." Clay looked at Sophie. saw hope warring with fear on her young face. "I came to say goodbye. I know you're leaving tomorrow." "We are." Eliza's voice was firm. "This doesn't change anything between us, Clay. What you did was brave and maybe even right, but it doesn't fix what's broken." "I know." "Do you?" "Because you have a habit of thinking grand gestures solve everything. They don't. The ranch is still failing. We're still incompatible. I still can't live the life you've chosen." Clay moved to the window, looking out at the street below. "You're right. About all of it. I can't give you what you need. I can't be who you need me to be." He turned back to face her. "But I need to say something. Not to change your mind, just so you know." Eliza stopped packing, waiting. "I built the ranch because I thought it would make me someone," Clay said quietly. "Someone important, someone successful, someone worth respecting. I thought if I could just push hard enough, work long enough, sacrifice enough, I could create something permanent, something that mattered. And I was so focused on that, I didn't see what I already had. A brilliant, passionate woman who believed in things bigger than property and profit. A daughter who needed her father present, not just providing. I had everything that actually matters, and I traded it for dust and cattle and stubborn pride." Eliza's eyes glistened. "Clay, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "You were right to leave, right to demand better. I was drowning us both, and I was too proud to admit it. The ranch is finished. Even if the courts don't seize it, the drought's won. I don't have the resources to keep fighting, so I'm letting it go." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet. Face whatever legal consequences come. Help the freed prisoners find somewhere safe. Try to rebuild something, maybe. But not the same thing, not the same way." He looked at Sophie. "And then, if you'll let me, I'd like to come to San Francisco. Not to interfere with your life or make demands, just to be part of Sophie's life. Whatever that looks like." Sophie jumped off the bed and threw her arms around Clay's waist. "Really, Papa? You promise?" "I promise, sweetheart. Not right away. I have things to finish here. But when I can, I'll come." Eliza wiped her eyes roughly. "You can't just show up in San Francisco and expect—" "I don't expect anything. I'm asking permission, asking if there's room in Sophie's life for a father who finally figured out what matters." Clay met Eliza's gaze. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking for a chance to be the father Sophie deserves, even if it means starting from nothing." Eliza stared at him for a long moment. Clay saw the war in her expression, anger and hurt battling with the love that had never quite died, pragmatism fighting against hope. Finally, she spoke. "You hurt me, Clay. Hurt us both. You chose that ranch over your family again and again, and I can't forget that." "I know, but—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "But what you did these past weeks, risking everything for people you barely knew, standing up when you could have stayed safe, that's the man I fell in love with, the man I thought you could be. I should have been that man all along." "Yes, you should have." Eliza's voice softened. "Sophie needs her father, not the rancher, not the outlaw, not the martyr, just her father. If you can be that person, really be that person, not just promise it, then yes, there's room in San Francisco." Clay felt emotion tighten his throat. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Prove it first. Finish what you started here, face your consequences, and then come find us. If you actually do it, if you follow through, then we'll talk about what comes next." It wasn't reconciliation, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door left open, a possibility left alive. Clay would take it. He knelt and hugged Sophie one more time, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "I love you, sweetheart. Never forget that." "I love you too, Papa. Please be careful." "I will." He stood, met Eliza's eyes one last time, and walked out of the room before emotion unmanned him completely. The hallway seemed longer than before, each step carrying him away from his daughter and toward an uncertain future. But it was a future with possibility. That was more than he'd had in years. The next 3 weeks moved with bureaucratic slowness. Federal investigators descended on the territory, taking statements, examining evidence, building cases. Deschamps sat in a Denver jail, his empire of fraud collapsing around him. The governor had fled to parts unknown. Army officers faced courts-martial for their roles in the tribal massacre. Clay spent the time helping resettle the freed Shoshone prisoners. With the scandal exposed and public opinion shifted, the government quietly released them from federal custody and provided passage to reservations of their choosing. Some went to Wind River, where family waited. Others headed north toward Montana, hoping to reconnect with scattered bands. A few, including Morningstar and her healing husband, chose to stay in the territory, settling on land Clay helped them secure. "You didn't have to do this," Morningstar said as Clay helped her family move into a cabin near the Copper Hills. "You've done enough." "Not nearly enough. Your people lost everything. The least I can do is help you start over." The old one who spoke to you, Swift Elk's grandfather, he would be pleased. His spirit can rest easier knowing his people survived. Clay thought about the old man, about Running Wolf who'd died too young, about all the lives ground up in the machinery of corruption and power. "I wish I could have done more. Saved more." "You cannot save everyone," Morningstar said gently. "But you saved us. That matters." The settlers on Blackwater Creek received government assistance, food, medical care, and eventually resettlement to more viable land. Samuel Porter sought Clay out before leaving, his gaunt face showing the first signs of hope. "My family's heading east, back to Ohio. This frontier dream, it cost us too much. But I wanted to thank you for exposing what happened, for caring when no one else did." "I'm sorry about your daughter." Porter's eyes filled with tears. "She's buried here. We'll never forget that. But at least now people know why she died. That has to count for something." Clay hoped it did. He hoped all the pain, all the sacrifice, all the lives lost added up to something meaningful. But he wasn't sure. The corruption was exposed, the criminals facing justice, but the system that enabled it all remained intact. How long before another Deschamps appeared, another scheme to exploit the desperate and powerless? Still, they'd struck a blow. Made people pay attention, forced change, however temporary. That was worth something. The Double R Ranch was formally seized by the territorial government to satisfy debts and legal judgments. Clay watched from the ridge as new owners rode through, assessing what they'd acquired. The ranch he'd spent 12 years building, the dream he'd sacrificed everything for, passing into other hands with bureaucratic efficiency. Miguel stood beside him, silent and solid. "How do you feel, Jefe?" "Lighter than I expected. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long, I forgot what it felt like to set it down." Clay turned away from the ranch. "You're welcome to stay on, you know. New owners will need a good foreman." "And abandon you? After all this?" Miguel snorted. "Besides, I'm too old to break in new bosses. I'll take my share of the payout and head down to Mexico. Got family there. Might finally retire, spend my last years fishing instead of chasing cattle." "You've earned it, amigo. More than earned it." They embraced, two men who'd fought together through drought and desperation and finally rebellion. When they separated, Miguel's eyes were wet. "You take care of yourself, Jefe. Don't do anything stupid." "Too late for that." Miguel laughed. "Yeah, way too late." Clay's legal situation resolved with surprising leniency. The federal prosecutor, reading public sentiment and aware of the political firestorm, offered a deal: plead guilty to trespassing and theft of government documents, accept time served and 5 years probation, and avoid trial on the more serious charges. Clay's attorney, a reform-minded lawyer from Denver who worked pro bono, advised him to take it. "They want this to go away quietly," the lawyer explained. "You're a folk hero now. Putting you on trial for freeing prisoners who are being illegally detained would keep the scandal alive. Better for everyone if you accept a slap on the wrist and disappear." Clay accepted the deal. He stood before a federal judge in Denver and pled guilty to crimes that felt inconsequential compared to what he'd actually done. The judge sentenced him to time served. The weeks he'd spent as a fugitive counted as imprisonment, and 5 years probation with strict conditions. He couldn't leave this territory without permission, couldn't associate with known criminals, had to report monthly to a probation officer. It was as close to freedom as he could hope for. Rowan found him after the sentencing, the young man's face showing pride and relief. "You got off easy." "Yeah, feels strange." "What will you do now?" Clay had been thinking about that. "Head to San Francisco eventually. But first I need to tie up loose ends. Make sure the people I promised to help are actually helped. See things through. Need company? You've done enough, Rowan. More than enough. You should head somewhere the law doesn't know your name and start fresh. Rowan shook his head. I rode with you when it mattered. I'll ride with you a bit longer if you'll have me. Clay felt gratitude wash through him. I'd be honored. They spent the next month ensuring the freed prisoners were settled, that the relocated settlers had what they needed, that promises made were promises kept. It was unglamorous work, bureaucratic and tedious, but it mattered. Clay had spent years building a ranch. Now he was building something else: trust, community, relationships based on care rather than control. Finally, as autumn began painting the mountains in gold and crimson, Clay stood once more on the ridge overlooking what had been the Double R. The new owners had already changed things: new fences, different cattle, plans for irrigation if the drought ever broke. It wasn't his anymore. It would never be his again. But looking at the valley, Clay didn't feel loss. He felt release. The land would endure with or without him. What mattered now was people. Sophie waiting in San Francisco, Eliza's cautious offer of possibility, friendships forged in fire and crisis. Those things couldn't be taken by drought or seized by government. Those things lasted. Rowan rode up beside him. Ready? Almost. Clay pulled out the photograph Eliza had given him, Sophie's smiling face frozen in a moment of happiness. He'd carried it through everything, a reminder of what mattered. Now it was time to stop carrying memories and start building reality. Yeah, he said finally, I'm ready. They rode west toward the railroad that would carry Clay to San Francisco, toward his daughter, toward whatever future waited beyond the frontier. Behind him, the sun set over the valley, painting the drought-hardened land in shades of fire and gold. Ahead, the mountains rose like promises, difficult, uncertain, but worth climbing. Clay Rourke had spent his life fighting for land and cattle and pride. He'd built an empire from dust and stubbornness, then watched it crumble. He'd become an outlaw, a fugitive, a man who'd risked everything for people he barely knew. And somehow, through all the loss and sacrifice, he'd found something he'd been searching for all along. Not success or respect or legacy, but purpose. The kind of purpose that came from standing up when it mattered, from choosing right over safe, from protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The ranch was gone. The dream was finished, but Clay was still standing, still moving forward, still fighting for what mattered. Not for land now, but for people. Not for empire, but for connection. Not for legacy, but for love. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined when he first broke ground on the Double R 12 years ago. But riding toward the western horizon with autumn wind in his face and hope cautious but alive in his chest, Clay thought maybe it was the ending he'd needed all along. The frontier had always been harsh, unforgiving, a place where only the strong survived. But Clay had learned something in the fire of rebellion and the ashes of his old life. Strength wasn't just about endurance or stubbornness or the ability to keep fighting when everything else said quit. Real strength was knowing when to let go, when to admit you were wrong, when to choose love over pride and people over property, when to stand up even when standing up meant losing everything you'd built. That was the kind of strength that mattered. That was the kind of strength that lasted. As the railroad station came into view, Clay touched the photograph in his pocket one last time. Then he spurred his horse forward, riding toward redemption, toward reconciliation, toward a future built not on dust and cattle and stubborn pride, but on the only things that ever really mattered: family, integrity, and the courage to change. The story that had begun with a man standing alone on a ridge, surveying an empire built on sand, ended with that same man riding toward reunion, carrying nothing but truth and hope, and the hard-earned wisdom that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you were looking for all along. The frontier would endure. The land would survive. And Clay Rourke, rancher turned outlaw, turned father, would face whatever came next with eyes open and heart finally, painfully, beautifully free.